Oh, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Data Dispatch, your one-stop shop for everything talking about stocks. We're going to be talking about Palantir Technologies. For those of you that don't know, everybody probably does, it recently was announced that it's going to be included into the S&P 500. This is incredibly bullish. Investors have been waiting a long time for this, and basically we were just kind of, I think, anticipating that it was going to happen at some time, but we don't know when. So this is kind of more of a surprise, personally, for me. Now, what we are going to be analyzing in this video is the S&P 500 inclusion effect. And what do I mean by that? We're going to be looking at some historical data, studies that have been done, looking at a particular article, kind of analyzing what we've seen when stocks have entered into the S&P 500, how that is going to reflect, translate, correlate to PLTR. We don't know because there are a lot of market variables right now, but we can at least make some hypothesis. Also, with those market variables, remember the jobs report came out weaker than expected on Friday. We can review that in a second. And you have the anticipation of the interest rate cuts, which is showing signs that the economy is starting to cool down. So how does Palantir get kind of intertwined in all of that craziness? If you're new or returning viewer, hit that like button, subscribe for daily videos, and of course, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm collecting all the data and dispatching it to you. Here we go, pop it up. Palantir closed at 30.33 at the end of the market close. So now what we see right now in the after hours after the announcement of the inclusion, and remember, the actual rebalancing won't take place for a couple weeks. Palantir right now is trading at 32.71. We've seen predictions that Palantir could be popping up to 35 or over come Monday. Now, one of the big things that we have seen, and this is, the article that we talked about, Palantir joining the S&P 500 along with Dell. The stocks that came out, Palantir specifically replaced American Airlines and Dell replaced Etsy. So sayonara to those stocks, because now Palantir and Dell are coming in to get a little piece of the pie, the S&P 500, which is actually a pretty big piece of the pie. So really, what happens to a stock when it's added to the S&P 500? Now, a lot of people don't for sure, hopefully a lot of you guys probably do know, but if you don't, the S&P 500 is the market capitalization weighted index comprising 500 of the leading listed companies in the U.S. It's kind of incorporated into the name of the actual index. Now, talking about how does the S&P 500 work, the selection and the removal criteria. Number one, needs to be a U.S. listed common stock, highly liquid, needs a market cap here of $13.1 billion, a public float of at least 10% of its shares need to be outstanding. So a ton of its shares just can't be out there waiting for people to buy up. Had its IPO at least a year earlier and maintains a positive earnings for the most recent quarter in addition to the trailing 4 consecutive quarters. Now Palantir is on like number 6, I think. Number 6 or even 7, even pretty high. So that's where people are wondering, when is this going to be happening? So does a stock price increase when it's added to the S&P 500? This is called the S&P 500 inclusion effect. And what we've seen is that studies have observed a pattern that once a company is really added to this index, it generates abnormal returns. And that this effect is evident mainly on the announcement date and on the actual date of inclusion. So the announcement date, which happened yesterday, could we see a reflection, a domino effect, a continuation of that momentum and the buying pressure coming Monday? That's where you got the predictions of $35 or higher in terms of price target, and the actual date of inclusion, the date that the rebalance actually happens, and is actually going to be, been in there. A lot of different portfolios, a lot of different funds will be buying Palantir on a passive basis. Now, what we've seen right here, this mentions an older study. In 1986, kind of in the 70s and 80s, experienced a 3% increase on average, and that actually increased in the 90s to 8.3%. Now, talking about that, the reason that the company is becoming, not more profitable or financially stable overnight, we're not seeing big bullish, different types of things in terms of the individual stock. the most common explanation for the inclusion effect is that basically these companies are starting to gain more awareness, and Palantir is gaining more awareness across the board. We've seen this with just making more headlines, being compared to some of the big stocks, even being on compared to some of the Magnificent Seven stocks. Now, also increased analyst coverage and a sudden liquidity influx. This is a big thing. The liquidity influx, I think, is a big thing because what we've seen is that a lot of passive buying pressure is coming in. However, take that with a grain of salt because in a recent study here, they actually found that the inclusion effect is rare nowadays. But we are seeing, and I want to say combined with the trendiness of PLTR, we're already seeing an inclusion effect that's happening right now before our eyes on the first step, the announcement date. However, actually looking at the data between 2011 and 2021, they experienced an actual basically median excess return of negative 0.4%, which is basically 0%. So talking about that, they say, and why they believe this is because it could be a structural change, including the rise of the ETF market. ETFs have been really exploding within the last decade. Lots of different ETFs out there, and market and the passive investing ecosystem is continuing to grow. However, I do think the sudden liquidity influx, in addition to the analyst coverage, the trendiness behind PLTR already, I think is going to be a little bit different than what we were expecting in terms of consolidation, what the data has shown. I think in the short term here, we're going to continue to see PLTR seeing some buying pressure. Now, with that being said, how long does that last? And that is because we have a lot of macroeconomic pieces of data being released that are continuing to show signs that the economy is cooling. We saw, remember, that the US stock, they fell sharply after the weak August jobs report. And specifically what we saw was 142,000 jobs were added in August, below the economics estimate of 164,000. Unemployment rate fell a little bit below here, but the actual real unemployment rate that they're saying is at very high. It's up in the sevens. And what this is anticipating is the market expecting at least a 25 basis point interest rate cut from the Fed in the beginning of the cycle of beginning to lower rates. And seesawing, possibly, we see about a 50% probability that we could get a 50 basis point cut. And that is going to leave a big effect on PLTR because eventually Palantir can't just keep trading in the green if the general market keeps showing signs of soft landing. That's the goal. But what if it's bigger than that? What if we're more at a brink of a recession? So that's why it's incredibly important for risk assessment right now. And really, particularly, making sure not all the eggs are in one basket. Make sure you're always doing your own due diligence and your own research out there in the world of investing, because there's a lot of people that have different opinions. And at the end of the day, it's important to remember they are all opinions. And that's what mine is. I think in the short term, we're going to see an increase here. And I also agree, I think in the rebalance date, we're going to see an increase, $35 on the table. I think that's possible. Do you agree with me? Let me know down in the comments. Peace out, take care, and I'll catch you guys tomorrow. We'll talk about what important factors we'll be looking for in the market this week.